Hello and welcome back to Kawego Makes channel for 3D design. Today we're in Nomad Sculpt again, and we're going to be working on a lantern. We're going to keep it simple today and try and move through this quickly because it can be a little tough to pull off. We're going to be using some special tools such as the Radial array tool and Bollean tools, particularly in this video, and we'll go over how to get this design done and looking extra snazzy. So from the beginning, we're going to go ahead and open our items list, and we're going to create a new sphere and deleting the old sphere and increase our post subdivision. We'll go ahead and zoom out a little bit. We're going to then adjust the size of the sphere and squish it down at the top. Then we're going to go ahead and clone that sphere, move it down, and we're going to make it a bit larger. So this is going to make up the top of our Ishidōrō. And we'll shrink down that top piece just to make sure that it's proportional to what we're trying to pull off. Then we're going to go ahead and on Gizmo, we're going to add a box. We'll move that box down, kind of shrink it down a little bit using that green dot, pull it up against the sphere that we made earlier and increase the size. And we'll just make some small adjustments with that orange ring to increase and decrease the size. Go ahead and validate that object, and now we'll check the size ratio and duplicate it. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to make the bottom part of the top roof. And we're going to squeeze that one down a little bit as well, using that green dot to decrease the height of the object. And we'll get an angle on it to make sure that it's sitting about right and is about the size that we're looking for. So we're going to go in and we're going to make the part where we cut out the Ishidoro roof, and we're going to use the lathe tool. And we just need to make something kind of in the shape of a small dish or plate. And then we'll use a radial array to make a radial of that plate shape. We'll pull it out a bit. And we're going to rest it across the top of our Ishidoro roof. We'll increase the size. And the goal with this is to get that kind of curved carving out of the top of that roof. What we're going for is we're trying to maintain those ridges that you see along the corners, the four corners of the roof. And I found that this way was the most unique and effective method for getting that effect. So we just use that lathe tool. We carefully position the lathe plates across the top of the roof, move them into position, and they don't have to be absolutely perfect. What we want to do is try and get them to where it meets all the way to the very corner of the roof. We want to make the plates a bit bigger so that the curve of the roof is not so intense. If we have a larger plate, it keeps from carving too much into the box that we're using. We'll position the box carefully so that we get about a good thickness that we're looking for using that green arrow tool. We'll move it down a little bit. We'll make sure that all of those plates are intersecting in the right place. And then we're going to go for the radial. We're going to validate that radial, and we're going to uninstance all the children. That's going to make sure that we have an object for each Boolean action. So we turn off the eyeball on all of the plates, Then we're going to select the box, being careful to select the plate, then the box. And one by one, we'll go through and do the Boolean action on the roof. We had to do this carefully, and we had to do this in order, because if we try to do all of the Boolean actions at once, it'll actually make an inside-out inverted object where all of the plates intersect, and that's probably not going to be the effect that we're going for, and it's going to cause us to have a lot of extra work to do later. So with that all done, what we'll go ahead and do is we're going to turn on local symmetry. We're going to go for X and Z symmetry. That way we'll turn on the lines so that we can properly see them. And then we'll use that move tool to carefully adjust the roof, pulling it up into the top crest object of the roof. And what we're trying to do is pull it up so that those ridge lines of the roof will intersect at the corner of the capstone that we have on the roof. And so you can see here, I'm very carefully going through and making sure those ridge lines intersect with the corners of the capstone. Go ahead and do a voxel remesh, and then a very light and careful smoothing along the edges of the roof, making sure that we don't lose too much detail. I'm doing just a very light sweeping pass. Again, being very careful not to lose any of the detail that we've worked so hard for. All right, so with that out of the way, I go through, I notice that there's some defects on the edge of the roof, and I just went ahead and made my smoothing tool radius a lot smaller. That way I don't impact a bunch of stuff that I'm not trying to, and just carefully brush out some of those defects on the edges of the roof. Okay, with that out of the way, I make some careful adjustments just to make sure that that capstone is positioned where I want it, and that it's lined up and looks pretty accurate all the way around. Ended up doing some extra adjustments with the move tool just to kind of pull it up into place. Again, being very careful not to ruin any of the hard work that we've already done. I pushed down a little bit on the middle of the roof line just to keep it from bulging out. And it's just for aesthetics. You can kind of do this. You can take whatever approach that you prefer. And then I do some careful resizing of that capstone to make sure that it all lines up and that all the corners are hitting correctly. I ended up noticing that there was a slight difference in the capstone's width compared to the roof width, and that might have been due to some of the movement that I had done, moving the roof line up towards the capstone. And again, hitting it with some light smoothing just to get out some of the warping from the move tool. And then I use that move tool on the corners to carefully pull and curve up and inwards that rooftop to just give it a tiny bit more character and make it look a little more interesting. And pulling it up and then actually outwards a little bit, and then making sure that that looks good all the way around. Pretty simple to do that quickly. Let's see here. I end up remeshing that capstone just because I noticed it kind of stood out to me. And then I hit it with a smooth tool. That way it looks a little bit more like everything else that we've been working on, just to kind of soften it up and give it a more stone cut look to it. Yeah, and that's pretty good. We go ahead and on Gizmo add in a new box. We're going to use this as the main lantern portion of the stone lantern, the Ishidoro. We'll pull that up into the rooftop just slightly. And then we need to make another box inside that one. So we've got that main box in place. Go ahead and double check the order of everything to make sure that it's stacked in the same order that I have it on the screen. And back down to the lantern box portion. I'll clone that. And I'm going to move it up a little bit. We'll turn on that X-ray so that we can see. I'm making kind of that upper support structure of the lantern and making it a little bit larger and squeezing it down with that green circle just to make it a little bit thinner, pulling it up against the top of the roof and making sure that that meets there properly. I know that it has kind of a repeating pattern on the bottom, so I went ahead and cloned the one that I did on the top. Just clone it and move it towards the bottom. Pretty simple to do. I made it a little bit thicker just because we're going to have a base plate that we're setting the lantern on, or a pedestal that we're setting the lantern on, and it'll sink down into that. So if there's a little bit of extra material, it's not so important. Here I use the select mask and rectangle tool to stretch out the pedestal and shrink it down to meet the other part of the pedestal if it comes up to it. This is kind of a cool trick because in Nomad, you don't have these trapezoidal, 3D trapezoidal kind of primitives that you can use. You can kind of carve away at the stone by using your select tool, the rectangle tool. You'll select the half that you don't want to move, and then you can just use your gizmo tool to shrink it down, and then your arrow tools to move it up into place. Here I'm going through each of the stone pieces that I've already previously made, remeshing them real quick, turning on local symmetry X, Y, and Z, and just smoothing out each one of the stone pieces that we have in place already to just give it a softer touch and make it look like it was carved and less like less fake looking, I guess is what I could say. But yeah, so real simple procedure here, just making sure that each edge is nice and soft and making sure that everything looks right. I went ahead and cloned that center box, and then I have my X-ray tool kind of leaning into that. We're going to carve out the middle of the box, or the middle of the lantern here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same technique that we used for the lathe tool. We're going to make a radial array and carefully moving the box inside that radial array outwards towards the edge of the lantern piece. And what we'll do is same procedure, uninstance them. We're going to click on the group of boxes. The eyeball to deselect all the eyes, and then very carefully making sure that we first select the box and then select the check marks of the outer box, and one at a time using the Boolean to subtract each piece, making sure that we don't end up with some inside out stuff that you'll see if you try to do the Boolean action all at once. But yeah, just quickly going through and subtracting all the boxes from the radial array from the center of that lantern area. And it makes it go pretty quick. Then what we need to do next is we need to make all the frame for that lantern area. So we're going to come in here and we'll go ahead and make a new box. We'll add that into the scene on our gizmo. We'll shuffle it into place. And then we're going to use another box on the inside of this box. And just to get the sizing right, I went ahead and sized it so that the ratio is correct. I went ahead and sized it to where it's a similar or same size as the lantern center box area. And then with both clones, I'm just gonna go through and make sure that we carve out the center of the one box from the other, and that will make the frame area for the lantern. And then we can squish that down. We'll use that blue circle to squish it down to where it forms a nice solid frame. And then we'll go ahead and add in a radial array, and we'll use that radial array to help us position where that box needs to be to form the frame properly for the lantern. And I'm just checking to make sure that it's lining up correctly, that it's in kind of the right rough position. Then we're gonna shrink that thing down and move it up into that top left hand corner, and we'll be able to start using that to make the inner frame of the lantern shade. So here I just kind of rough guess about where I think it needs to be, pull it outwards until it meets with the other one. And this is kind of eyeballing it. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. Just kind of trying to make sure that it roughly fits where it should be. And then we'll go ahead and clone that, move one off to the right, and then we'll clone it again. Both of those, pull it down, and then just like that, we have all four of the frames done. Double check the rough position of those. I think it looks pretty good. And we can go on to the next portion. Here I'm adding in a box to put start building up the pedestal, and then you just move it down and underneath the previous one. I wanted to make this one a little bit larger and stretch it up to meet the lantern, and so I'm kind of mostly concentrated mentally. I'm just concentrating on what the base shape needs to look like. Then I come in with the select mask, select the bottom of it, stretch it up and shrink it down with the gizmo tool. And that allowed me to make the pedestal portion very, very quickly. Pull it right up into that pedestal area and double check to make sure that everything looks right. I did notice that there's some positioning that's not quite right here. For some reason, the gizmo tool was offset, I think, by the frame that I was working on earlier. So I just went ahead and reset the translation back to 0 for that. Make sure that it's dead center. And that way I don't have to worry about that later. But yeah, once I've got that thing centered, we'll add another cube into the project. Once I get the positioning down to where I want it, and start working on the base piece. And this part's really simple. You just kind of squish it down a bit using that green circle, and then stretch it out using your orange ring. Double check to make sure it's centered on your object, and just kind of lift it into place. And yeah, you can just validate, clone, move the next one, move the next one into position. You'll adjust the sizing using your orange ring and using the the green dot to squeeze it down if necessary to make it either thinner or thicker as necessary. And then for the last piece, I just made it super thin and just pulled it outwards so it looks like a nice stone plate for the whole lantern to sit on. And then I'm going to go through, and we created a bunch of objects, but they still look, a little too rigid and a little bit fake. So I'm going to go in, turn on my local symmetry for each object, and turn on XYZ symmetry, and then just go through carefully with the smoothing tool and making sure not to do too much damage, but make it nice and soft around all the edges, just to make it look more like a stone carving might naturally look like. You want to avoid forgetting to voxel remesh it. As you see for a second there, I forgot my voxel remesh, and it creates kind of like a pixelated mess when it's only at, like 100 triangles. But yeah, going through, making sure to voxel remesh up to, 170, 200 or higher, turn on XYZ local symmetry, and then just tapping it with the smoothing tool, just a little bit. It doesn't really take much at all. You don't have to have a lot of pressure. Don't need to do a whole lot. And it looks pretty good pretty quickly. Here, I'm just hitting the pedestal real quick. This one has the potential to do, the most damage, so you want to be extra careful with the pedestal part while you're smoothing it out. I noticed there's plenty of defects in the edge of the pedestal that need to get knocked out, and you just got to be careful. But yeah, pretty straightforward, just going through and smoothing everything out and making sure that it looks nice. By this point, I've got the whole structure in place. Everything's smooth the way I want it. And we're going to go ahead and add in that lantern piece. So I selected an object that was already centered this time, just to make sure that everything was working all right. And yeah, so what I do here is I add in that square centered on that previous piece, pull it down into the middle of that light box area, the lantern area. And I'm going to be using this as the light. So we're going to change the surface of it to be refractive. And then I'm going to change it to a yellow color. And then I'll do some adjustments to the surface and interior glossiness of it, the roughness, just playing with these values to try and get something that I think is going to be aesthetically pleasing for the project that we're working on. And I felt like that was pretty close to what I wanted. Just maybe a little bit more roughness to make it look rice papery. Perhaps the way a traditional setup might look. And then I just go into the rendering phase and making it look nice. I added in an outer light and then a point light, and then I move the point light into the middle of the lantern, and that makes it look like it's glowing. It's a really cool effect. I was quite pleased with the way that turned out. Anytime I'm trying to make a glowing light source, I end up choosing the point light and then just kind of moving it inside whatever object that I've created, and then just doing some little adjustments here and there to make sure that it looks good. That could be brightness, intensity, or whatever. And then for the final touches, I just kind of go through and check the proportions and kind of scale things how I think that they should look for the overall finished product. And yeah, looks pretty good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video, this overview on how I made an Ishidōrō, and hopefully you learned something from it, especially maybe using the radial array, Bollean lathe tool together to kind of get some unique shapes. That masking tool, using that rectangular masking tool and pulling objects up and squeezing them with the gizmo, can create some really cool effects. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, if you learned something, go ahead and hit like. And if you'd like to get notified of upcoming videos on our channel, go ahead and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for joining us.